Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the 70th episode of SADS Live. It's great to get to be with you. I'm Mike Ackerman. I have the privilege of serving as president of the board of the Sudden Arrhythmia Death Syndrome, or the SADS Foundation. And it's on behalf of Alice Laura, our CEO, that I come with to you here. We had a little break. We moved to every other week. We used to be together every single Friday since March 2020. And recently we shift to basically every other Friday. So I'm here with you. I'm actually on vacation, believe it or not. So they let me out of Mayo Clinic, where, as you know, I have the privilege of serving as director of Mayo Clinic's Winland Smith Rice Genetic Heart Rhythm Clinic and its complementary Winland Smith Rice Sudden Death Genomics Laboratory. So they've let me out, and this is where I was. Let me show you. Oh, look at that. I'm going to start with some pictures last Sunday with my granddaughter, now 18 months old. And I'll show you another one before I go to some sobering news. Here's one you'll like. This is last Sunday, a Sunday wedding for my PhD student, Dan Clemens, and his wife, Dr. Kelsey Chow, residency for her pediatrics. So Dan got married and is off to honeymoon land with he and Kelsey. And then a sad day yesterday. This is my third son, Gen Z Bear, I call him. He's a Baylor Bear at Baylor University, and he did a summer internship in engineering at Mayo. And so he's now in the airplane now, heading back to Baylor for his final year. Well, it's great to be with you. And Natalie, it's good to see you come on board for today. And there will be many of you joining us. And I'm glad you are, because believe it or not, summer is coming towards an end already. I know, I can't believe it. I don't like that. My wife and I just finished an hour-and-a-half walk here at Green Lake, Wisconsin. Love that before coming in. But now it is getting close to back to school, back to university, back to kindergarten for the first time kindergartners out there. So we are talking about SADS safe schools, how to make school a safe experience regardless of what your genetic heart condition is. And before I bring on Mandy, who's going to help us, I just have to remind us of the state that we're in, the state called COVID-19 pandemic. Remember that? I know we want it to go away, but it hasn't. And you can see here from the Johns Hopkins, we are now in the fourth surge. We were doing so good a month ago. Worldwide, 205 million cases, 4.3 million deaths. The United States of America, 36 million cases, 619,000 deaths. And last week alone, 760,000 new cases, 3,500 new deaths. And the good news part of that is tracking until recently, pre-vaccine, the case fatality rate was around 1.5% to 2% in America, meaning if you got it, you had about a 1.5% to 2% chance of death. Now, the case fatality rate is under 0.5%. So the current SARS-CoV-2 Delta variant is far more contagious than the original strain, less deadly. Why? Something called the vaccine. So we've been getting vaccinated since December of last year. Healthcare workers, December, January. I got mine in January. The public shortly thereafter. And in the United States, there have been over 150 million individuals who are fully vaccinated. Yay, but that's barely 50% of the adult population, nowhere close to the necessary so-called herd immunity. And because of that, when the SARS-CoV-2 variant strain emerged, the Delta strain, more contagious, more infectious, and unvaccinated, more lethal. Vaccinated, almost for sure, won't be a problem. In fact, if you look at all of the hospitalizations for COVID-19 right now in the United States, and you say, why? Who's getting hospitalized from their COVID? 99% plus unvaccinated. So it used to be that who was getting hospitalized? Elderly, obese individuals with chronic conditions like diabetes and hypertension and so forth. Now, the single most likely reason why you're hospitalized from your COVID-19 is it is called I am not vaccinated. So I encourage you, if you haven't gotten the vaccine, get the vaccine. Which one? Anyone. Now, full disclosure, I personally like the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines the best. I like the technology in them, and so forth. But get the Johnson and Johnson if that's the only one you have. There have been 4.6 billion vaccine doses administered worldwide. So all of these things about the spooky side effects or what will happen from the vaccine or the vaccine causing this, that, and the other, most of them are actually fake news, cruel hoaxes from the anti-vaxxers. Some of them are real, like vaccine-associated myocarditis. That's real. It's just that it's really, really rare, about a 1 in 4,000 dose exposure risk. And so we need to separate all the noise, and there's a lot of noise out there, and focus on the signal, which is these vaccines are one of the greatest advances in technology that I've seen in my entire adult life. And we're staring a gift that we have received in the face and just saying, I don't need that, I'm rejecting that. So encourage you, if you haven't gotten the vaccine, get the vaccine. And again, we're going to focus on SADS safe schools, but I'm going to grab Susan's question right now. Hi, Susan. Do we know how COVID-19 affects SADS kids? Well, that's been the good news during this whole year plus of the pandemic. Is back when we first started doing this, there was tremendous anxiety that the SARS-CoV-2 virus itself would trigger long QT episodes, CPVT episodes, ARVC episodes, would make the heart rhythm unstable, and we would bring out a SADS event. Not true. Turns out we didn't think it was going to be true back then. It still isn't true some 18 months later. It just does not look like our heart conditions put us at risk, or that the virus puts our kids at risk of triggering their SADS condition. And that's quite interesting given some of the discoveries we made at the basic level, showing that this virus itself can cause the cellular QT interval to lengthen in the dish, and yet in the whole host, it's almost never triggering a dangerous rhythm event. I don't have a single channelopathy patient who has had COVID have that be what the time in which they had a new event. I also don't have a single channelopathy genetic heart patient who has landed in the hospital from their COVID in that phase before the vaccinations became available. Now, of course, like any virus and any vaccine where you can have a virus triggered fever or a vaccine associated fever, lower fever, because we need a lower fever, especially for our families with Brugada, where fever from any source can be Brugada irritating. But I must say that even that, I don't think the fever in Brugada is a spooky scenario. It's just, yes, I've got a temperature. Yes, I should lower it. But no, I don't need to freak out about it. Well, with that, Aaron, bring on Mandy Chesser to join me to talk about SADS Safe School Month. Mandy, hi there. Welcome to SADS Live.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. And I know, Mandy, as we were talking offline, that you've been part of SADS for the last 13 years. And your story begins because of long QT in your daughter, Madison. And you want to tell how you learned about long QT, how it presented in Madison, and then we'll put our focus on how do we have kids with SADS conditions live and thrive at school. So what's Madison's story like?
So Madison is a initially diagnosed with long QT in 2008. Her pediatrician prior to that, in 2006, had always suspected long QT, but when we had went to a specialist, he said that she did not have that. And then he convinced me to go for another evaluation 2 years later. At the time, Madison was 8, and I took her for the second evaluation to an electrophysiologist out of town, and that visit brought a different light to our family. Madison had an EKG and a stress test done, and the visit ended up with her being prescribed a medication daily, a script for an automatic defibrillator, and for genetic testing. The 4-hour ride home was somber, to say the least. I channeled my energy in finding out all the information that I could about long QT syndrome and learning as I went along. I wasn't just a mom, but I was a mom on a mission. And so when I came across an organization called SADS, they gave me the wealth of information that I needed as a parent to continue, and references that I could actually rely upon. And at that time, there was only one genetic testing site, and our health insurance didn't cover that. It was an astronomical amount of money for the genetic testing, and they were wanting everybody in our family to actually get tested. And so I actually wrote to the insurance company and asked why it wasn't approved. And then I took it a step further and went to the Florida legislation. And after several letters and communication, it was passed, and insurance companies now in Florida do pay for that testing. So I am thankful for that. They didn't get to pay for mine or Madison's, but they do for the next person that comes along behind us. So I also tried the same tactic for the AED, but they say that it is an experimental device, even though it's located throughout state and government buildings, and pretty much anywhere you go into a store, you will see an AED. We actually bought our own AED, and with that, when Madison was 10, she had a cardiac arrest in the front yard, and then they actually implanted an internal one in her. She was shipped to the hospital, a children's hospital in Jacksonville, and got the internal ICD and pacemaker. So she was actually just playing in the front yard of a neighbor's home, and 911 was called. So when she had that done, it kind of changed the world that Madison once knew. And it changed her life from knowing gymnastics and dancing and swimming and so forth. And we just had to kind of steer her in other activities such as the piano, theater, and Girl Scouts, those sports that were non-contact. It was uncharted waters for all of us, and we did go through some hard times. I ended up getting the genetic testing as well. And when I was diagnosed with long QT syndrome in 2008, if you placed my test on top of Madison's test, it was like an exact replica. They were just identical. And long QT has not affected me the way that it has her, but Madison's QT prolongation runs a little bit higher. And we are both on beta blockers. And I am without an ICD, but Madison is with. But
Well, with that, yeah, so Mandy, let me jump in there. There's so many things I would love to ask you about, but we'll put our focus on SADS safe schools. But you shared how genetic testing was once expensive and unreachable, and now with the progress and your advocacy and that of genetic test companies themselves like Invitae, that it's incredibly accessible now. It's completely different. You mentioned how we have AEDs that you couldn't get. They were called experimental. And now we have organizations like LifeSure that help me and providers like me secure AEDs for basically almost every one of our families with at least a 95% batting average and success rate. And then you shared how back then when your daughter had her cardiac arrest, you shifted her from gymnastics to piano and theater and so forth. And now fast forward, 10 years, we don't have to do that shift any longer. We can have our kids stay doing what they loved, as we just published last month in the Journal of American College of Cardiology, where I personally follow over 700 athletes with genetic heart conditions, most of them long QT syndrome. And now, as of last week, I have my first long QT athlete who is an Olympic medalist from the Olympics in Japan. Silver medal. They didn't quite win it all, but
Hey,
they did get the silver medal.
that's big.
So much has happened in the life, just in these last 13 years of your own family's experience living with long QT syndrome. But take me back to kindergarten and elementary school. And after you learned of long QT syndrome, sort of pre-defibrillator implant for Madison, what was it like sending Madison to school then? What things did you do? What steps did you take so that you would have the confidence as mom that she would be safe at that school?
Well, at the time that Madison was in the fourth grade, she was actually in what they call a portable building. And so the portable building did not have a phone. And so my first thing was to actually get Madison a cell phone so the teacher would at least have access to call 911. It was very hard to let her go, but we both needed to let her go because she needed to have a life as well. And I just had to trust. I did prepare the school upon her diagnosis and what needed to be done and how to use an AED. I'm also a certified instructor with the American Heart Association in teaching CPR. And so I would actually teach CPR for free to the teachers that wanted to learn. I figured the more people that learn CPR, the more people that could save my daughter's life or another life. So they had an AED. I would ask them, do you know where it's located at? Do you know how to use it? I'd have Madison's AED that we purchased, and then I would actually kind of give them a little bit of a scenario. Being a nurse, it was probably a little bit different than a regular parent going in, but I would always notify the school prior to summer ending. If she was starting a new school, I would write the principal a letter letting them know what to expect, what her diagnosis was, what needed to happen for her. And then I'd say at the end of that letter, I would be getting in touch with them 2 weeks prior to the start of school to set up a meeting. It's very important for the parent to be their own advocate because there are so many students and your child can get lost. I would say set up a 504 plan, even if they don't need a 504. It just kind of gives them some extra benefits, such as the beta blocker. She gets tired. She might need some extra test time. Also, too, is with PE in seventh grade, Madison actually was able to participate in non-contact sports. And so she did actually do cheerleading and got onto the tennis team. So it was a nice reprieve, if you will, for Madison. But definitely you have to be your own advocate for your child. You have to not let them get lost in that system. Keep following up, communicate. And if anything changes during that school year, always, let the student or the guidance counselors know. Also, too, is there's the SADS.org. They have a wealth of information. I go under the professional, but even parents can go under the professional site. Go ahead and get your care plan ready. Just kind of tweak it to your needs of your child, and then take that with you when they have their school physical done every year in the summertime and have the doctor sign off on it and then take it to the school when you go for that meeting.
And Mandy, you mentioned a couple of tools, and but are there other tools that have helped you feel comfortable about sending Madison to school? So maybe for some of those who may not know, like what's a 504 plan anyway?
So a 504 plan is basically a plan that you do with the guidance counselors at the school, and it allows them to have extra opportunity for test taking or possibly a leave of absence if for some reason, she had to get her ICD replaced. And if she wasn't feeling well, then we would go pick up the work from school and she would be able to do it at home. So it just kind of gives you a little bit more of a leeway, and they're just not so strict about the attendance if there's a reason for her not to be attending.
Then you mentioned some tools from the SADS Foundation itself. What things did you find? And I know we posted just now the SADS.org awareness link, but what did you find there that was most helpful from the SADS Foundation to help structure the care plan for your daughter?
So there was an individualized healthcare plan for long QT syndrome, and they also had an emergency action plan, which is an EAP. And I just took those tools and just kind of tweaked them to Madison's um, condition, and then I would take him to her pediatrician, make sure that he was on board with everything. I know one of them was she was to have Gatorade. And so instead of having a Gatorade bottle, because only kids could take water, we would just put it in a inconspicuous container where you couldn't tell whether it was water or Gatorade. But that was one of those benefits. She could have frequent bathroom visits if needed because of the beta blocker and, of course, the Gatorade. And there were some other things that helped on that emergency action plan for Madison to be able to feel like she was a normal child at school.
And then between elementary, Mandy, middle school, high school, were there any unique challenges that emerged that you had to put on, mama bear hat or a tenacious pit bull activity to say that's the wrong answer that you just gave us, that's not how we're going to be doing it, or any big challenges that you encountered?
Actually, being a registered nurse, I think that they really trusted me and
Yeah.
knew that I was doing this for the benefit, not of just my child, but her as a student. So I didn't really face any challenges there. The one thing that I did, you know, pretty much harp on was the fact that if she was to go on a field trip, that AED needed to go with her. And being that there was only the one AED in the school, I offered for them to use our AED to take with them. But most of the time, I would actually just volunteer either myself or my parents or my husband to go on that field trip with them. And that way, it wasn't just an extra set of eyes on Madison and other children, just to make us
Yeah,
more
let's
secure.
follow on that because right as you said that, Mandy, Susan from Ontario, Canada, had just posed the exact question about, in this case, their child has Brugada. The school has an AED that remains at the school, and then is wondering if they go on field trips, which currently are coroned, as we say, uh, should they be sending their own AED? And in their case, they said, well, if he doesn't have a fever, he should be good. But just in general, your thoughts on, yes, the AED ought to be where your child is on field trips and things like that. Would that be what you would be encouraging?
Absolutely. That is what I would be just encouraging.
And I think that's been a point of contention out there. I know for some families, and I've gone to battle where they sort of have taken my SADS kid or your child and then sort of, I don't want to say ostracize them, but won't let them play on the playground out of QT fear, would not let them go on field trips because there wouldn't be an AED and things like that. And that's where I've really pushed. And I think families out there, you should really push if you're receiving that and say, well, wait a second, on this field trip, is there a peanut allergy kid going out on this field trip? If yes, my kid gets to go too. On this field trip, is there a kid with diabetes who may or may not have a sugar reaction, who may or may not need emergency action plan? The peanut allergy kid who may or may not need an EpiPen rescue. If you're making accommodations for those kids, you better be making one for mine because we have the same kind of emergency action plan. It almost for sure won't be necessary because our child is well treated, but we're going to have a safety plan and our kid is going to get to do all of the activities. But it sounds like you never had a fight like that, quite like that for Madison, that they were respectful and interested and responsive to what you were guiding them with. So that's nice that you had a smooth journey with that. But what would you say for those families who are bumping into those kind of obstacles?
Again, I would just say that you have to be that biggest advocate and cheerleader for your child, and you have to advocate for what is right. And they have the same rights as every other student in that building. And if anybody is going on a field trip and it's their field trip that they're going on and it's related to their classroom, they have the right to go on that field trip as well. I would say that being that I had the AED, it is an expensive device. I did not mind them taking it with them, but I wanted to know who was going to be in charge of that, because that was her lifeline here at home as well. And then also, if Madison went and stayed the night, we would have to go and train the person, to do the AED in case an event happened. But in our county, only 2 people have to be trained in CPR in the school. And it does not matter what size that school is. It can have 5 students or it can have 3,800 students. And that right there,
Yeah.
it just befuddles me on how that can be. But like I said, you just got to be a mom, and it's not just a mom, but a mom on a mission. And you just do what is right for your child, and just let them know that, whether you have to kind of put that disability thing in there or not. It's not like it's just equal rights for all students,
Yeah.
whether disability, medical diagnosis, or anything.
And I'm curious, Susan is asking about a medic alert bracelet. And I know every family is different, and I'll share my thoughts on the medic alert bracelet. But just curious, Mandy, whether you opted for that for Madison.
I did opt for that for Madison, and I also had a tag on her backpack as well. When she was in middle school, she kind of was a little bit more not wanting to wear that, and I was okay with that because at that time we had the internal defibrillator. And of course, I didn't want her to be different or labeled different than all the other children.
And what did your medic alert bracelet say?
It said her name, and then it had a contact number, and then it said long QT, apply AED immediately.
That's great. And I know for families out there that that choose the alert bracelet, I like exactly what you had, how you had that named. And I know for those who don't have an internal defibrillator, I'll often have them just write, long QT syndrome or Brugada syndrome or whatever the diagnosis is, and then the bottom line, shock me, because in that way it guides the paramedics to what page of the drill to move to instantaneously. And I think for yours, like if your child already has an internal defibrillator, for them to know on that, like I have an ICD or something for that. And it's interesting. I would say probably half of my families have chosen the medic alert bracelet and half haven't. And I think that's something where each family needs to work with their family unit and their child and say, does this bring increased protection, or does this potentially trigger some stigmatization in the school with kids and friends and non-friends and things like that? Did you encounter, or did Madison encounter any of that as she transitioned from elementary without a defibrillator to now middle school with a defibrillator and navigating the life of junior high and high school?
There were kids that are mean, but for the most part, I think that her friends were her friends, and they stuck up for her, and she didn't really encounter any kind of bullying as far as the long QT goes. So she was a very well liked individual, and everybody was generally concerned.
That's great. And I know there's a question here, and I think Annie's already answered it. Thanks, Annie. But first for Jim, congratulations for you and your family and your wife and your future child and your wife going through pregnancy with her LQT2. So first, remember, pregnancy for your wife carries no increased risk of an LQT2 triggered event. After your baby's born, that first 6 months postpartum, it is a higher risk window of time. It's not a spooky risk window of time, it's just higher. So things that your wife and you will need to be taking care of and helping with is good sleep for your wife. Make sure that her treatment program has been carefully reviewed by her long QT specialist. And then in terms of her current question about being hesitant about the vaccine, I'm not hesitant. The CDC just came out with its analysis again and showing that the risk benefit calculus clearly favors being vaccinated even while pregnant. So the data that's available, and now this is built on over 4 billion doses of the COVID-19 vaccine worldwide, would argue for it. I think the vaccine is right now, the vaccine is far, far safer than getting the Delta variant. And speaking of getting COVID-19, Mandy, you were sharing with me that you yourself got knocked down pre-vaccination time with the original strain of SARS-CoV-2, and you got kind of, you're young, you're healthy, but you landed in the hospital. You want to tell us a little bit about your COVID-19 journey that was not just then, but you're still dealing with some long COVID stuff?
Well, I was diagnosed with COVID. Is that mine or yours? Are you
You're
hearing me?
good.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was diagnosed with COVID in July of 2020, and I am still experiencing the shortness of breath. I have been since diagnosed with adult onset asthma. I have inhalers that I do and breathing treatments. I was out for a month and just laying in the bed. I got a lot of muscle atrophy and just haven't quite gotten the stamina back. It's definitely a chronic fatigue. Um, no vaccine was available at that time, and I would definitely push for that vaccine. My daughter has the vaccine. She did not have any side effects. My husband's been vaccinated, and my parents have been vaccinated. I unfortunately am not able to get vaccinated at this time because the lungs have not recovered fully, and the pulmonologist just doesn't think that it's a good idea in case I was to have some kind of side effect of symptoms of the vaccine. But as
Yeah.
soon as I'm able, I will, and I am still carrying the antibodies a year later.
Well, I'm glad you're recovering, and I'm thankful that I was able to get the vaccine or stay infection free. And so far, all of our family have gotten the vaccine. For those of you who are hesitant out there, I do understand it. Of my 4 adult kids, one, I will leave him unnamed, is vaccine reluctant and hasn't got the vaccine yet. He's getting closer, but the other 3 have. My wife has. And please, if you don't have a great reason not to get it, get the vaccine. Go get it today. You do not want this Delta variant. That is for sure. We're seeing hospitals. You're in Florida, Mandy, and we know that our Mayo Clinic Florida hospital in Jacksonville is at high occupancy right now with COVID-19, and it is 99% unvaccinated individuals, 1% vaccinated, who are landing in the hospital nevertheless. So get the vaccine. But back to school, and in this case, a great question that I'm sure you dealt with, Mandy, as we wrap up. How did you handle play dates? Would you expect the parents to take the AED? So in that time before Madison got her internal defibrillator, how did you do play dates, and what did you tell the families that when Madison was coming over to stay over there? How did you handle play dates?
Honestly, I tried to have the child come to our home. And if for some reason, they didn't want their child to come, I would just say, well, the reason is, Madison has an underlying health condition. And I said, I don't mind if she stays with you, but you just have to kind of keep an eye on her. And at first they were a little bit fearful, and then I would show them how the AED worked. It's pretty self-explanatory from the minute you power it on. And her good core group of friends just kind of embraced it. And she was actually able to stay the night with probably about 5 different individuals that I really trusted in her care.
Well, that's great.
But as far as dates, I would just volunteer to go or take them or just tag along.
Yeah, well, let me give you the final question that you would encourage. Maybe there's a new SADS family out there who is kind of like where you were 13 years ago, where before 13 years ago, QT were just 2 of the letters in the alphabet. And then those 2 letters took on a very different meaning for your family for these past 13 years. But what advice would you give to brand new SADS parents who are sending their kid to school for their very first time since their new diagnosis of their SADS condition?
I would tell them to stay on top of things, be that advocate for their child, to talk with their principal and their guidance counselors, and just be open. It is all protected health information, and nobody actually should be getting this information unless they have a need to know. I would not hesitate whatsoever to put on the mom cap if I had to, and definitely stand up for what's right for her. I think that the EKGs now, being a part of a child's routine physical, is a huge step in this, and it will help find an underlying condition. I think it's important that the physicals be done every year and followed, through and filed on school with or on board with the school.
Well, thanks so much, Mandy. And for Erin, who just texted that your words were directed to just her because she's getting geared up to take her Vera to preschool in a couple of weeks, and it's a new family. So Erin, all I can tell you is that it's going to go great. You will do great. Vera, I love that name. She will do great, but do not be afraid to be very, very strong as the advocate. The moms, and I'll say the dads too. If we have to, we can bring out Papa Bear or Mama Bear in a strong way. And I think it's just educating them. They're far more comfortable with a peanut allergy kid because of all the education that's done, and they're far more accommodating to the kid with a peanut allergy than they are with kids with SADS conditions. And that's just because the school, the nurses, they've gotten far more comfortable and familiar with the peanut drill. And it's just a matter of us with our families, one by one, getting the school comfortable with the SADS drill. And the SADS drill isn't harder than the peanut drill. It's just its own drill. And so don't accept no for an answer. Your child deserves to have an amazing preschool for Vera, or final year of high school, whatever the case may be, for when your family's been diagnosed. So Mandy, I appreciate you. I appreciate all your support and involvement with SADS ever since your family was diagnosed, and wish you the best in Florida. I hope things simmer down there. And it looked, I'm getting at least our word that maybe the peak is cresting, and the Delta variant is simmering down just a touch, or at least I hope that's the case for you all. But be well down there. Thanks for what you're doing, and congratulations to Madison, because I think we were talking about her as a 6-year-old, but she just graduated, right?
Actually, she's in her senior year at Florida State University, and she just graduated from EMT and is going on for the paramedic. And at the end of this month, she'll be starting that program.
I love it. So Madison's yet another example of living and thriving with her heart condition, and now an EMT and a first responder out there. So give her the best from us, and well done to her. And for everybody else, we will see you back 2 weeks from today Don't miss this one on August 27. Hopefully, we will have one or more COVID-19 experts. So we will have the experts join us, telling us what's going on, how do we navigate it now, answer your questions, whatever myths need to be debunked. But in the meantime, between now and then, if you haven't been vaccinated, get your vaccine. Until then, take care, everyone. See you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.